toxic politics, holidays, and family. Grab the Pilot Wife checklist, buckle up, and allow me, Jackie Ulmer, a 30-plus year pilot wife and aviation professional, to be your co-captain. Welcome to the Pilot Wife podcast. I'm your co-captain, Jackie Ulmer. I've been a pilot wife for over 3 decades, and I cannot imagine any other lifestyle. Yes, there's no doubt it's a mix of turbulence and blue skies, but what life isn't? I'm here to bring you the best that the aviation life has to offer. And if you want the Pilot Wife survival guide and checklist, go to pilotwifechecklist.com. Now, stow your baggage, strap in, and let's unpack the Pilot Wife life. Here we are, post-election, and it can sure feel toxic, can it? Throw the holidays, social events, family and friends into the mix, and you have what can surely be called a high toxic cocktail. Now, make sure you grab my guide at lowertoxiclife.com. Now, one huge takeaway is that listening has been ignored and underrated. And I'm not here today to talk to you about who was right, who was wrong, which party got it right, which party got it wrong, who should have won, who shouldn't have. I just really want to talk to you today about dealing with the aftermath of this. And we hear it on all sides that the Democratic Party was not listening to what most Americans were saying was truly bothering them and what was ultimately driving their vote, the economy and division. So whatever you do post-election, over the holidays with friends and family and any of your relationships, seek to be a good listener. Now, the holidays and social gatherings are coming. We all know it is. And a lot of people are feeling like they're in a sticky situation, that the conversation is going to come up about the election, who you voted for, who you should have voted for, who was wrong, who was right, and all of the rest of it. And then how we handle it is what could truly make or break the event, the holiday, and certainly the relationship, which at the end of it all is ideally the most important thing. It's been so sad for me to skim through headlines and see how many people, experts, news stations, podcasters, therapists, for heaven's sakes, are recommending to break off all contact with anyone who voted differently than you. I mean, a lot of these are mental health specialists. They're actually recommending this. I mean, what the holy H? Seriously. Now, I'm not a therapist. I'm not a counselor. I am a life coach, and I've lived a pretty experienced life after decades on this earth, right? I've gone through decades worth of elections, some good, some bad, and I've survived them all. So I'd like to believe that I'm logical, I'm compassionate, I'm not overly aggressive, and certainly I'm more invested in my family and my relationships than I am in having my politics be right. And that ultimately boils down to my beliefs and my opinions. So please note, I'm working to remain as neutral as possible here. Obviously, I have opinions, I have beliefs, and I voted, and I have for decades. And like I said, I've won some, I've lost some, and I have survived every election. And I've not lost any meaningful relationships along the way. Now, if there are some that have been lost, they clearly, and maybe sadly, were not all that meaningful, as I am unaware of any that I've lost. So that tells me that I'm not the one who ended any. So I'm going to break this down into 2 parts: how to think critically and manage your emotions, set boundaries, and actually deal with adult conversations. And then I'll get on to a little bit more of the specifics behind this election. And then from that, how to navigate and build conversations. Now, again, this is not about taking a side. I will share with you later how I gather my information and where a lot of this has come from. And then you can decide for yourself whether what I'm sharing here seems valuable and seems accurate. And then ultimately, as I want you to do, I want you to think for yourself. So I'm worried and I'm hopeful at the same time. I refuse not to be hopeful. I always strive to be part of the solution and not part of the problem. I try to practice compassion and empathy. I evaluate my own circumstances in every area. I was born American. I'm of European white heritage. I can't help any of that. I was born in a small town in Colorado, raised in a small town in Colorado with small town values, honestly. This was before the internet, before news was such a thing. I mean, when I grew up, I didn't know the political leanings of anybody, even really my family, until I became a teenager, probably. We just didn't sit around and talk about that kind of stuff. I have a very solid family. My parents are still living at 88, and my dad will turn 92 2 days after this publishes. And I come from a very average middle class family. I've had it really good, and sure, I've had some struggles, but I haven't walked in anyone else's shoes but my very own. And honestly, neither have you. So I recommend that you do the same as me. You basically assess your own situation, your background, your upbringing, your race, your ethnicity, a lot of those different type of things. I didn't come from a broken home. My parents are still married to this day, as I just mentioned. My children don't come from a broken home. But all of that to say, some do, but ultimately it can still drive us to similar values. So in assessing your own situation, that's one of the things that you want to do. What are your core values and why do you have those values? Do you ever question those values? What are your voting issues? Why do you have those voting issues? Do you ever question those? Gaining your own clarity about yourself creates then a more empowering thought or more empowering thoughts as you head into any discussion with others, especially others who might believe differently than you. So if you already know that you're at odds with some friends and family, and you're going to be together, then it's up to you to make a decision. If you're willing to be bold, then be the icebreaker. Get the elephant in the room out of the way to begin with, and perhaps even before the holiday event. Now, I'm recording this before Thanksgiving 2024. We have Christmas 2024. We have all types of activities that lead up to all of that. So you know you're going to be faced with some of these situations. And we know here in America, we had an election November 5th. We have a certifying of the election that's due to take place January 6th and an inauguration that's due to take place January 20th. So we've got a long way to go, honestly, before this is absolutely signed, sealed, and delivered, so to speak. So it's up to you to decide on what your goal is with these conversations. Are you looking to be right? Are you looking to force your opinion and thoughts and beliefs? Are you looking to change another person's mind? Or, as you can tell, I'm suggesting, are you looking to find that common ground that you and others around you share? Possibly even those things that you can agree on and those things that you can agree to disagree on, and still, most importantly, love, like, appreciate, and respect each other for your own perspectives regardless. And reflect on and remember those things that bring you together to begin with. Now, maybe your goal is to simply establish some boundaries in the relationship when it comes to toxic conversations, such as politics, religions, and gender ideology can all fall into those too. But today we're specifically talking about politics, but you can use these tools in any aspect. The goal is to be able to continue to have a relationship and work to understand while not focusing on changing or agreeing with another person's perspective. And it's important to note, again, I keep stressing this. I don't mean to be redundant, but it's so important. We all have perspectives, we all have ideologies, and we all have our own life experiences that have led to those reasons why we believe and why we vote the way that we do. One of the more challenging relationships is the parent-child, and specifically the parent-adult-child relationship. And typically when we're having these conversations, if you're the adult child in the situation, you can often feel like you're still in that inferior subordinate position, that you still have to kind of kowtow to the beliefs of your parents. And the biggest thing that you can do is communicate that to begin with. Mom, Dad, I really appreciate our relationship. I appreciate you, my childhood, the values you instilled in me. And as I know you want this to be true for me, I've grown and I've grown up and I have my own experiences that I've gone through, and I've developed some of my own beliefs. And some of these may differ from yours. You grew up in a different time and generation than I did. And of course, that's going to lead all of us to experience different things and believe different things. It's not my goal to change you, and it's not my goal in a conversation to be right. And at the same time, I'm not here for you to change me or for you to make sure that you come away from this being right. So I just want to make sure that we always have an open line of communication. So are you open to discussing the election and listening and sharing with me without trying to make me wrong or change my mind? And I promise you, I'll do the same for you. Those are just some words that you can use to put into your own language skills to communicate. Now, when you begin to communicate in this way, you begin to set yourself up with a better chance then of being on equal ground, because in their own mind, if they're truly listening to you, even if they don't want to acknowledge it, they have to look at you and see you as the adult who you are, right? Or at least that's how I approach it. I brought my children into the world. I gave them the best that I could while they were under my care and under my roof, and now they're not. And it's not my job to control them, to micromanage them, or to parent them unless they ask me to take on that role. And most of the time these days when we're having conversations, they're not asking me to reparent them. So prepare yourself before the conversation. Get calm. Meditate. Listen to uplifting and soothing music. Hug your dog or borrow someone's dog. Did you know that just hugging a dog regulates your heartbeat? It calms you down and it regulates your heartbeat to theirs, which is always at a calmer level unless they've just gone through something. So that can be a great way to regulate your nervous system and get you prepared for these conversations. Now, this probably goes without saying, but avoid alcohol before entering into and engaging in any of these discussions, because it just tends to make things worse. And I think you probably know exactly what I mean. It lowers our inhibitions typically, and it allows our mouth to get out of control. And it's possible that I'm speaking from a little bit of experience here. Determine and establish and then communicate your own boundaries. Focus on understanding from their perspective. And this can be so challenging. Stephen Covey, the author of The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, put it best when he said, seek first to understand, then to be understood. And this can be so challenging because we have a tendency to think that our own beliefs and our own thoughts are the truth. And the reality of it is, right at this moment, they are our truth, but they aren't necessarily another person's beliefs, thoughts, or their own truth. So be prepared with your own questions to ask of others, seeking to understand someone else's perspective and their life experiences and reasons. And keep in mind that this does not necessarily mean agreeing with them or altering those beliefs. My goal personally is to always be an informed voter. And I say that as someone who was not at all an informed voter until about 2016, when my son went into the Marine Corps. And all of a sudden, things got really serious for me, realizing that our government officials were making decisions that involved his life and limbs. And that's when I really started paying attention. I'm embarrassed to say that, but it's simply the truth. So if that's been you or is you today, that's okay. I totally get it. I've learned not to rely on any headlines of any kind. I never read a headline and believe it without diving in deeper. Celebrity endorsements on either side mean nothing to me. They mean absolutely nothing to me. They sway my vote in no way, shape, or form. What does sway my vote is getting really clear on my own values, what matters to me, and what I'd like to see for not only my own future, but the future generations coming up, including my children, my granddaughter, and any other grandchildren that come along and their children. And so I want to navigate my relationships with those who are closest to me based on that. Now, again, I'm not here to tell you what to do. My biggest goal is to help you think about the situation and feel your feelings and be clear on how you want to land with that conversation before it begins so that you can set yourself up for the most success possible so that you come away feeling strong and empowered and like a good communicator. And at the end of the day, you maintain respect, dignity, and those mutual feelings with that person who you care about. Again, you may not change their mind, they may not change yours, but at the end of it, you want them to say, just like you say about them, I respect that. I don't agree with that, but I can respect that. And I still love you and I still want to spend time with you. Because again, at the end of it, it's truly relationships that matter. Those politicians who you vote for or don't vote for are not going to be there on your deathbed. They're not going to help you when you're sick, and they're certainly not going to show up for your funeral. But hopefully, your strong family members and friends will. So get clear on what those primary issues are to you and why they're important to you, because this, again, will help you communicate them in a way that is more restrained, meaning you don't go, off on a tangent, more succinct, and yet firm. Okay, those three things are very important so that you make your point without belaboring it and causing that person to tune out. So I'm going to ask you some questions to ask yourself. Why did you vote the way that you did? Did you vote for the person who was at the top of the ticket? Did you vote for a passion that you feel? Did you vote for their platform, or in other words, the issues that they run on? Or did you vote strictly in alignment with a party that you align with? Now, being clear on those means that you don't have, as long as you know, then you don't need to go into huge detail with others, which I mentioned can get overly passionate and, belabor the point, and it can be very drawn out. And this leads to those people just tuning out, as you likely do. I know I do, when it just goes on and on too long. State your own thoughts, your opinions, and your beliefs, and then leave room and space for that person to ask you questions. But again, don't feel the need to go into great detail or this great need to justify why you feel the way you do, unless you're compelled to and you feel strongly about it. And then, of course, be willing to give them the time and space to do the same. So here's an idea of some questions you can ask them. When you hear them say why they voted, how they voted, etc., you can ask, what is it from your life experiences that gives you that perspective? And again, these are questions to answer for yourself too. When you think about how you voted, ask yourself, what is it from my own life experiences that leads me to that perspective? Because again, that's going to embody in you, well, heck, why do I think this way? Why do I believe this way? Why do I vote this way? Another question, has something specific happened to you that makes you feel that way? That makes you believe that way, whatever wording is good for you. And then, has something happened to someone close to you that makes you feel or believe that way? And then, what are your core values? And again, just listen. The most important thing is not to allow any of these questions to turn into a gotcha kind of question. You're not asking this question to set them up for why you can tell them that they're wrong for thinking or feeling this way. You're putting this question out there just to get them to think internally, to get critical in their thinking versus thinking based on a headline or based on a person or based on a platform or a party or any of that, to get really clear on what it is that aligns with their own values. And the goal is to open communication and good dialogue and to lower resistance and that fighting with each other, because you are able to talk about it. And then make sure that you listen and don't interrupt others. We see that in the debates a lot. If you watched any of the debates, not just presidential, vice presidential one, I did watch. That was much more kind and compassionate and respectful for sure. But I watched some of my local race debates too. And I was always aware when the person started interrupting, wasn't listening, wasn't allowing that person to have their time, and they talked over them. So try as hard as you can not to interrupt. And also, not to have your mind spinning as they're speaking with what your immediate response is going to be to that, because that distracts from your own listening. You can't be thinking about a response and truly listening with compassion and empathy and the attempt to understand. The number one goal, or at least mine, is to always turn these conversations from an us versus them perspective to a we ending. We are connected. We want largely the same things, even if, in fact, we disagree on some of those. And hopefully you do. Not disagree, but hopefully you basically want the same things. We will get through this. So be prepared to open your own mind, set down your own sword, lower your own resistance. And again, don't interrupt. Listen fully with as much eye contact as you can. Now, once you've listened, repeat back to them what you hear and why. Ask if they're open to hearing your thoughts and perspectives and your why. Then state calmly and clearly what those reasons are. Allow them to ask questions. And if they interrupt you and it's not at a good time, or if they get heated and begin to interrupt you, just stop. Just calmly pause. Stop the conversation. Don't have the tendency to keep talking or talk over them or raise your voice. Just stop. And when they finish, ask if you can continue. Just say, okay, are you ready to continue listening? Is it all right with you if I continue? And again, try not to say that with a self-righteous attitude. I almost went into that just even sharing this, but just say calmly, okay, I'm ready to continue if you're ready to listen. And if they're smart, they're going to get the point from that little nudge. If it gets super heated and it becomes very clear to you that you're not going to find common ground, just stop, smile, reach out and, grasp their arm or their hand kind of firmly but kindly and say, you know what? I love you, or I really like you and I value our friendship, our relationship. And it feels like this is getting us nowhere. Do you feel that way too? How about we just talk about some other things that we do agree on and that we enjoy together and discussing? Now, that's some questions, and those are some tools that you can use. And I welcome any of your questions, comments, experiences in the comments below. Please do certainly leave those because I'm always interested in hearing those. Now I'm going to get into the second part that gets more to the heart of this particular election. And again, I live in the United States. You may be somewhere else, but I know most of the world has been watching with popcorn, the election cycle here in the United States. And maybe that's not you, and that's fine, and good on you if it's not, for sure. But what I'm going to be sharing here is possibly something that could be true for the last few elections and certainly future ones. I ran for and won a seat on my school board in 2022. It's been the best experience that I've ever had in terms of politics and that type thing, and in terms of teaching me to be better at so many different things. It taught me more than anything to put aside my own ego. When you sit on a board, you have to put aside your own ego. So I put down my ego, I put down my desire to be right, and I learned to listen better and ask questions that would lead me to a path of better understanding the person, their perspective, and the issue. And I really, truly did begin to see things from a variety of situations. And while as a board, we don't always agree on everything, we do share a mutual respect, and our district has really noticed and commented and appreciated our board. I've also learned from talking to a lot of people because of this position that I'm in about concerns that people have about the primary issues that are driving our voters, or so it seems. And these are how the responses that I've gotten from being out and talking to people and listening to a variety of different perspectives have stacked up in this particular election cycle. Now, this is an important note. I'm not suggesting that these are my values, my voting issues, or that they should be your values or voting issues, or that these are in any particular order that you would put them in, or that I would put them in. This is just what I've heard myself most frequently talking to people, as well as listening to podcasts on both sides of the aisle, actually three sides, and putting these into order based on what I heard. And that's one thing that I do have is a number of podcasts that I listen to politically. Most of these are on YouTube. I like YouTube because I like to see it in video format, because then I can look at them. Body language is important. The more you watch body language, the more that you can tell when somebody's skirting an issue, lying, avoiding, evading, or straight up telling the truth. Typically, it's not 100% perfect, but typically. So I listen to podcasts that lean Democratic liberal and those that lean Republican conservative, as well as a few libertarian ones, which I have to say, those have really opened my perspective and shifted a lot of my thinking for me, caused me to ask better questions and listen better. So the number one issue that keeps coming up is the economy. And what I keep hearing is being told constantly by the news and politicians that inflation isn't real, the economy is thriving better than it's ever been, 401ks are growing. That doesn't mean anything to someone when they feel the sting of it at the grocery store, in the gas line, or their fears that they will never afford their own home. Now, here in the US, the border and immigration is a huge deal. And I live in Arizona, which is a border state. And I can tell you from my own perspective, it is definitely a real issue. Gender ideology and biological men in women's sports, bathrooms, safe spaces, along with gender affirming care for minors, often without parental consent, such as California, which it's my understanding has recently passed a law saying that schools and certain organizations do not have to share their findings with parents. I understand there's some other laws. Don't quote me. I'm open to being wrong on this. I'm just, again, sharing what I've heard and the research that I've done on this that appears that this is true. Now, this issue is not the same as accepting adults their decision to identify as they choose or alter their body in any way that they see fit. Fear over what's being taught in public schools is also a concern. Again, with the sense that the government feels like they're on equal ground parenting children and deciding what's best for them, discounting the actual legal guardianship of a child. And I've heard this a lot on the school board as a primary issue. Health concerns. That's a big one for me as a health coach. Our declining health, chronic disease, capture of big food and big pharma, lobbyists, and government agencies. This seems crazy. If you ever go back and search this, which I have a great graphic, I'll put it in here, where the heads of the FDA, CDC, HHS are government agencies. How many of them end up going to work or being named to boards for like companies like Pfizer, Moderna, big corporations that fund millions of dollars in lobbying? I don't know about you, but to me, that just seems like a conflict of interest. Then there's censorship and freedom of speech, the constant labeling that if you vote one way, it means that you are this, this, and this, and this. Most people are not single issue voters. You can vote for a person that's been labeled as this and not believe in that label or adhere to that label. There's a whole myriad of things that people vote on. And so to try to, boil people down to just one label that fits with how they cast their vote is crazy. And most of us don't want to be that way. Most of us aren't that way. Forever wars, my other hot button beyond health, my personal hot button above anything, because I have a son in the Marine Corps. I'm sick of the forever wars. The United States, since World War II, has not been in a war that's actually had a clearly defined goal, nor have we truly won a war since then. And I even hate to use that word, because what does it mean to win a war? There's no such thing as a won war. This is a hot button for me. You'll probably never change my mind on that. This is one where I'm going to come out really strong with my own opinion. Body autonomy and mandates, okay, which abortion can fall under that. It certainly does. But this is where the question came up often with people, what is body autonomy? And it can get sketchy. Does it truly mean my body, my choice when it comes to everything, or simply abortion? And then science, and what mandates science? Who gets to decide what truly science is? If we've learned anything over the last 4 years, is that scientists and doctors and people who form opinions are largely divided on what they believe true science is. It's my understanding from my schooling is that it's developing a theory and a hypothesis. You test it, and then you test it again, and you test it again, and you're constantly looking for the changes before it ultimately settles into something that we can truly fall into science. And like anything, science can change. When we look back over the last 10, 15 years, just even with health issues, the mitochondria and how all the body systems are so related. And, there's so many doctors today that were never trained on nutrition, and they often don't relate disease to nutrition. And to me, that's just crazy, but I was raised that way. So to me, scientifically, they go hand in hand, but you will talk to some doctors that don't believe that your heart disease has anything to do with the diet that you've consumed over the years. They want to write you a prescription and send you along your way, never getting to the core issue. All right, climate change. It's kind of funny how that conversation really shifted out of this election largely with the people who were running, not necessarily with people aligned with the party, but with the actual speeches, debates, and different things of people who were running. Corporate news and propaganda, that was a big part of the election cycle too. People have figured out that corporate news is bought and paid for. Over 60% of their funding typically comes from big pharma. They're not advertising for prescription drugs in order for you to run to your doctor and ask you for that. They're advertising because then they control the puppet show, and they are able to censor and monitor what news is able to tell you about things that are going on scientifically. You can do your own research and find out that that's true in a lot of cases. Federal versus state authority. When should the feds have control, the federal government, and when should the states have control? If you look at our Constitution, if you study it, which I will admit, I hadn't looked at it since I left school until I got it out in 2022, I think it was. I got a book, the Constitution. I read it and I thought, heck, I could have never passed a test today on what the Constitution actually says and what it means. So that's important. And then, of course, the Supreme Court. Do we pack it? Do we break away from the great experiment that was America of things that have worked for so long by our founding fathers? It's kind of a slippery slope. If you start changing things, it never stops. I hear a lot of women say that about Botox and plastic surgery. Once you start down that road, it's like a slippery slope, and nobody ever knows when to stop. When is enough enough? A little bit more here, a little bit more there, and pretty soon you've butchered everything. So one thing I like to do is I ask people, where do you get your news and information? How do you educate yourself on the issues, on all the issues, on the candidates, the platform that they're running on, the party? Is it celebrity endorsements? I already mentioned that means nothing to me. In fact, it often makes me think lesser of the celebrity endorser, whichever side they're on, because I think, you know what? I just want to enjoy your movies, your music, your art, whatever it is. I don't need to know how you vote. Are you getting your news from TikTok, from Twitter, X, the mainstream media? Are you listening to podcasts? And are you discerning the information beyond just the headlines, diving deeper into the facts? Do you seek out the entire video or news report, or do you solely rely on altered clips and AI, artificial intelligence? We all know that's a thing. We've seen it over and over again, where you see a little clip and then you go look at the entire video and you realize that's really not what the person was saying at all. That little clip was pulled out interjected into somebody else's belief system and an opinion about how they wanted you to hear it and receive it. And it's not the original intent at all. And if you really watched any political commercials, you could clearly see the AI. They would have the person speaking like they were doing a formal speech or a press conference, and then they would run talking points over the top of it. And you could clearly see that the mouth wasn't lining up with the words that were coming out. And I thought, man, if people aren't really paying attention, like watching, you might not catch that. You would just hear their words. Now, I want to really encourage you to get out and dust off your own BS meter. We all have one. So when you hear or read a headline, ask yourself, where does this fall on my BS meter? Do I really believe this to be 100% true? Could it be a little bit sketchy? I'm going to use the example of election interference, and I'm just going to use a recent one. And again, this isn't an opinion about whether or not I think that there was election interference. If you really want to know the truth, I think there's been some shady stuff for a long time with our elections. I definitely do, on both sides. I'm not saying there's only one side that's a bad player. I believe we've had election interference for a long, long time. I experienced it in my own school board race where a person in my neighborhood took him 3 tries to get a ballot printed that had my name on it for school board. It was printing in our school board district, another school board. I didn't make that up. He called me on the phone and said, I don't know what to do. I said, go up again and ask. He did. It took him 3 times. Anyway, so is it perfect? No, it's an imperfect system. But I'm going to share with you an example on the BS meter. Immediately after the election, we started hearing, what happened to 20 million votes? How did Biden get 20 million more votes than Harris? And there's no balance in that. What happened to those 20 million votes? Now, I'm hearing that 20 million is shrinking by the day as they continue doing the vote counting. We know that they call elections based on percentages and all of that before all of the votes have been tallied. So when I heard that initially, I thought, well, they haven't even counted all the votes yet. So how could we even start having that conversation? Again, I'm not saying that's not going to prove to be true. I'm not saying that there hasn't been shady stuff with our elections. I'm simply saying we, as smart, educated Americans and citizens of the world, need to pause, wait, and allow time in the process to play out. And then, of course, come to your own conclusions, ask your own questions. And then other things that were out there. Do we really believe that Trump is akin to Hitler? Despite the fact that you might not like him, I understand that you might not like him, but do you really think he's the equivalent of Hitler? If so, wouldn't the entire country be willing to go to all ends to prevent that? People didn't vote for Trump because they don't like him. They believe he's racist, a misogynist, and Hitler. They believe he's a liar. If you voted for him, be prepared to create some thoughtful discussion around these concerns that some of your family members and friends are going to raise to you. Is Kamala Harris really a communist? Despite the fact that you may not like her, people didn't vote for her because they believe she had no clear resolutions to resolve their biggest problems, the economy, those very things that I stated. And a lot of what I've heard is that and I felt this way too, she spoke to Americans like we're children, okay? Many stated that they didn't want to vote based on gender and ethnicity. So if you voted for her, again, be prepared to create thoughtful discussion around these concerns that some of your family and friends are going to raise. Now, 2 of the most interesting things I noted, and again, I'm not a poll worker, and it's hard to fact check some of this, but according to some of the exit polling, and I've heard this on both sides. So again, 3 sides, actually. I've heard this from the Democrats, the Republicans, and the Libertarians. Exit polling, 40% of women that took the exit poll who are under 30 voted for Trump based on their economic fears, and less than 13% of them stated abortion as a top issue. Now, again, I don't know if this is true, but I've listened to a number of podcasts, read headlines, done a little bit of my own research, and unless I was there myself, I can't 100% tell you that was absolutely the case. So I'm pulling together information from my various sources. So in my thinking, and I've thought this for a long time, both sides have made abortion a bigger issue than it really truly is. So my advice to everybody is, depending on where you fall on this issue, look at your own state and find out what the laws are in the state that you live in. Just don't allow yourself to get caught up in unnecessary fear mongering about what's going to happen because of this, that, or the other thing. And then the number two thing I found interesting, and again, these are from the sources that I listened to. I didn't do any of this research myself. Black and Hispanic men who voted for the Republican ticket in stronger numbers than they have in decades are tired of being marginalized and talked down to. There you go. All right. So what can we learn by looking beyond headlines? More than anything, be skeptical, be suspicious, be educated. I hear this a lot. I'm not political. Well, I never thought I was political either. But the reality of it is, yes, yes, you are political, even if you aren't aware of it. You are political by default. You live in the world, which, like it or not, is governed by our political environment. And if you live in the United States, you can look all around you and you can see that everywhere. I'm looking at my 6-foot wall out the window that is required to be painted in a specific color scheme. I'm looking at the roof. I live in the Southwest. It has to be the Southwest style tiles on the roof. I can't just put a shingle roofing on my house, even though I own my house outright. We are surrounded by politics, whether we like it or not. And you and I both vote with our wallets every single day. We vote on home costs. We vote on grocery prices. We vote on gas prices. We vote on the cost of cars and electric vehicle mandates and education and extracurricular activities and the pay for teachers. We vote every day with our wallet and with our check in the voting booth. The pay for everything in our economy is largely negotiated by the politicians who control your life, insurance, medical costs, on and on and on. So it's okay to say that you don't want to be political. What I hear that being is, I don't want to be an activist. I don't want to be politically involved out there working or supporting candidates or fighting with my neighbors, family, and friends. I get it. You don't have to be political in that way. Just be educated and know what you are voting for or against. And again, make sure it aligns with your values. I had a great hour-long conversation with my adult daughter, who's 29, and we talked about the election, and she said some very interesting things to me, and she opened up my mind to some ways of thinking. But the biggest thing that I advised her on, I'm not going to break her confidence and tell you what all she advised me on, but I loved how smart she is, how logical she is. And I did give myself a little bit of a pat on the back, hoping that I influenced some of that. But here's what I told her: be educated. Unlike me, who for 30 years cheated off my husband's ballot, and I was unconcerned with what was going on because my life was largely good. I wasn't struggling with mental health. I wasn't struggling with paying the bills. I wasn't struggling with children who had special needs in school. I wasn't struggling with a lot of different things. And so because of that, I allowed myself to engage in some luxury beliefs. If you haven't heard of Rob Henderson, who wrote the book Troubled, about his growing up in the foster care system in California, ultimately entering the military, the Navy, going on to, I think it was Cornell, I can't remember, one of the Ivy League schools. And when he got there, he realized he's of Asian descent. I believe he's Korean. Korean and Hispanic. I think he ultimately found out. I think I have that right. I know the Korean part I do, but he just realized that people looked at him and his ethnicity and the fact that he was at this Ivy League school and just assumed that he grew up in this is in the book, the traditional Asian household where your parents push you really hard to achieve and all of this. And he was kind of like, I didn't even grow up with two parents. I was, moved around the foster care system and then adopted and then abandoned by a father and a whole history. And he coined the term luxury beliefs. And this is such a powerful phrase because it's something that I've learned to measure so much of my own beliefs and thinking by. What is it about the way that I'm thinking that's potentially a luxury belief because of my own experiences, life, and environment? I cannot help who I was born to, my race. I can't help a lot of those things. But what I can do is check my own thinking and make sure that I'm not allowing my luxury beliefs to override certain things. Okay. So I also talk to my daughter about discerning beyond headlines. I'm not telling her to get on the news every day and spend all day going through that, but maybe once a week, check in. Pick a couple of podcasts that you listen to, pick three: a Republican, a Democrat, and a Libertarian. Pick three where you like them, you get along, and listen to those once a week and just check in on what's going on in your country. Listen to all sides so that you can have a greater perspective and you can challenge your own thinking, your own beliefs. And then decide on your values. I told her that. What are your core values? What matters most to you? And then reevaluate those values as your life changes, as you marry, as you have children, as you move, as you change careers. So many different things can alter our values. If you're a parent, you know exactly what I mean. We make decisions quite differently from the moment a child comes into our life. And then look around you and determine what you like and what you don't like. And then ask yourself, how can I invoke change? How can I invoke change? And my advice, don't listen to any mainstream media, not CNN, not MSNBC, not Fox News, not your local news, not The View, and certainly not far-leaning right or left organizations. Find a happy medium, people that are really, truly willing to state the facts and tell the truth to the best of their ability. We're all human. We all have beliefs. We all have opinions. We all have those life experiences that determine how we think and how we vote. So, the best way to handle family, the holidays, and what can be deemed as these toxic conversations around politics is to just address the elephant in the room as quickly as you can, possibly even before the holiday or social gathering. And I highly recommend doing this face to face if at all possible, because most people operate far better on their best behavior when they're in person. Think about it. People will fire something off by text or email that they would never say to you, looking you in the eye face to face. The written word can be so damaging. So if at all possible, do not get into any conversations via text or email, because the challenge with that is the only context that goes into that conversation is the opinion and context of the person reading the information and not the person who wrote the information. If you can't do it in person, do it via a Zoom chat or a phone call at very least, and just say, I'm not going to get into this. I'm not going to engage in this verbal exchange, this verbal back and forth via text messaging, Facebook Messenger, or email. It is truly a recipe for disaster. And I think we've all experienced that. So again, what are your values? What are the issues that are most important to you? How do you see either candidate making a difference? How can you find composure and calmness around an election that's already taken place now? Remember this, there are campaign promises and there are campaign realities, and they very often don't mesh up. And if we look back in time, we see that with every candidate in every election everywhere. Everybody promises the moon to get elected, and it sounds great, and we vote and buy into that. But the reality of a candidate single-handedly being able to produce those results is often impossible or next to impossible. And then once you get those discussions out of the way, move quickly to other more exciting, kinder, gentler topics at your holiday events. If someone wants to bring the conversation back to politics, it's up to you to possibly listen to what they say and then make the decision on how to move forward. If you want to continue to engage, simply restate the things that you've already said, reaffirming what your thoughts, your opinions, your beliefs are on the issues, giving them the space. But if you feel like it's just going to spin out of control or end heatedly, simply say, you know what? I feel like we talked about this already and we're in a good place. I'd love to just leave it there. And always remember that the word no is a complete sentence. In and of itself, no explanation is necessary. You could say, no, I'm choosing not to go there, or have that conversation if you want to add a little bit to it, but no is a complete conversation. So my thoughts for you as we move on from the 2024 election madness, that's it. Please leave a comment below if you have one. Keep it friendly and kind if you do. This is not the place to debate an election that's already over. It's simply more about bringing us calm, bringing us peace regardless, bringing us back in sync with the ones we truly care about, truly love, and showing up as our best version of ourselves. And if you haven't watched the rest of my holiday series, you'll find the playlist here. Do you ever find yourself on the struggle bus with relationships, career, or life in general? I'm a mindset and peak performance coach helping women rediscover their own sense of identity and purpose, avoid turbulence, and put their own oxygen mask on first. Together, we work to get you out of autopilot and create a better flight plan for life and relationship success. As a pilot wife for over 30 years, I've navigated thousands of miles and moments in aviation, mommyhood, business, and life in general. I would love to offer you a free call to see if I might be able to help you too. You can go to coach.pilotwifepodcast.com. And if you have a topic suggestion or a story to share on the show, go to ask.pilotwifepodcast.com. And of course, you'll find all of this at resources.pilotwifepodcast.com. Please take a moment to review and rate the show on whatever your favorite podcast app is. This helps the show get found by others who need what we have here. I'll see you on the journey, and thanks for listening.